Awesome. Great. Well, welcome everybody. If you want to drop into the chats some of your experiences, so places where you've practiced, that'll help build out our session for later. And times when you weren't ready. So things that you shared yourself or that you heard from others. So welcome to GenAI as a practice partner. There will be lots of breaking out in spaces here for those who have played in workshops with me before. But we're here to introduce sort of a new idea, a new concept, and to begin to build that concept out together, and then welcome all of you to contribute to building that going forward. So thanks to Innovate US for hosting this, and really glad to sort of be able to build with a like-minded community of public servants who are figuring out new ways to make stuff better. So I'm Michael. I work in Montgomery County government towards more just, human, and liberating governments. And we're really working here to make sure that our government is more agile and resilient and adaptive. Some of our programs, our Innovation Accelerator is our flagship. We'd been launching it for 6 months before COVID. And it meant that when our 9,000 employees all went to Microsoft Teams, 50% of our Teams users were folks who had gone and practiced this new thing, which was Microsoft Teams. And that was in contrast with the rest of the organization that was waiting for a really big formal rollout. And the theme we're going to sort of keep playing with is how do we have our organizations jump in and practice more so they learn and are more ready for different features that emerge. I'm also a coach, and I'm a collector of outdoor public benches, which I just like to ask like fun questions about, like the one on the far right. If it's is that 3 chairs or is that a bench? So if you want to wander around cities with me in non-virtual spaces, that's just a little bit about how I like to play. So today, our goal is to really understand the role of GenAI as a practice partner, distinguished from other uses of generative AI, to explore what makes this possible and then what futures might be as a result of this new sort of approach. I know that we've got a lot of emergency preparedness folks here, first responders. This is not about emergency planning. It's about getting prepared. And I'd love if you're an emergency response professional, if you could just identify yourself in the chat or raise your hand and wave so we can see. Cool. Awesome. So we've got some people who are like pros at this, and then the rest of us who you have to deal with when the emergencies happen. And this is about the practice spaces for all of us together to be more prepared, right? Like we don't just look at game tape all day or look at a bunch of plays. It's going out and practicing and getting on the scrimmage field that we actually learn and get better. So we're going to be playing with GenAI as a practice partner. You're all going to be breaking back out into those groups. And then we're going to sort of work together to figure out what's coming next for this space. So we've already done some connection space. We are going to talk about practice as a way to be more prepared, to be more ready. Introduce GenAI as a practice partner. We're going to jump in and practice, and then we'll reflect together. So practice. I just want to take a moment to think about practice in your own life. And I welcome you all to share that into the chat. Some experiences when you've practiced, where it's been useful to you. Maybe you were on sports teams growing up. Maybe you've had a mock interview that you wanted to get ready before you got your job in government. And for me, I think a lot about bicycle riding, right? Like you can sit and you can talk about riding a bicycle as much as you want. But the way that you learn how to ride a bicycle is by getting on that bicycle and actually riding. And practice is super powerful because it builds those muscles and it builds that muscle memory. That's individual muscle, that's organizational muscle, right? It allows us to figure out how does this actually work in reality? I can see the mechanics, I can read about the bike, but then I'm going to jump out and give it a shot. I can see this plan. Now I'm actually going to test this plan out. I'm going to figure out what's missing, what's too much. And as I sort of do that work, it's creating these new neural pathways, it's creating muscle memory, it's building these habits of response so that when new things arise, we're ready to respond and not just to react. Even when that situation plays out differently than what we expected, if we're practiced, we're a lot more ready for that unknown. So it's all about sort of readiness at the individual and the organizational level. And I think practice really works when we take that action and that reflection, we combine it to create experience. And we have to realize that we don't just have to like wait for something to happen to have that experience. We can practice to begin to get more ready and more prepared. I think really critically that the practice spaces are learning spaces, which are spaces that we don't have as much of. Sort of as Tim mentioned, it's that opportunity to fail, to iterate, to develop a system. It actually, when we know that we're practicing, people act in slightly different ways, right? It encourages people to make mistakes at an earlier stage. It allows us to try out new approaches because we know we're going to run a new and different practice session. Yeah, it allows us to do, as John notes, some co-design work. Allows us to sort of test those plans, to test those theories of change and those assumptions. And practice is a little bit different than drilling, right? Drilling is sort of a component of it. That's sort of like let's wax on, let's wax off, the Karate Kid thing. But it's really here moving from the drilling, the drilling to that sparring. Let's play in live spaces with these scenarios. Let's get on the field with another scrimmage team. So for me, this became really important. I was in the mayor's office in Chattanooga on July 16th when we had a domestic terror attack in our city. It's a day that many of us will never forget. And the police were ready, although they were screaming back because they were halfway to Nashville. The chief of police was halfway to Nashville at the time. But was us, the rest of the government, ready? Right? The people who were in communications, who were in the mayor's office. With the terrorist, in this case, was a family member, we learned quickly, had a family member who worked in the department. How is that going to work with that department? What were we going to do? And the next year, we had a school bus overturn, another really tragic accident. We were more prepared, but our practice had been the terrorist attacks. And it really got me thinking, like, how do we make sure that we're more ready? Not just that we have these plans, because in the middle of the action, it's not the best time to be dusting that plan off the shelf and testing it through for a first time. And we know that living through a thing isn't the only way to boost that level of experience. And in government, and outside of government, we face these all the time. Since releasing the article, I was thinking at the beginning about the building collapse in Miami, but in wildfires in LA. But there's been so many things that we couldn't have imagined emerging just since the initial release of the Practice as a Partner article. And what I challenge folks to think about for practice as well is, what are those greenfield opportunities, the gifts that come our way, and how might we be more ready to catch them? And so I'd welcome, just because this is going to warm us up, folks to drop into the chat some other opportunities for which folks were often not prepared. So think about, what are the spaces we might not be prepared for? And the key thing I just want to stress is that being planned, like having a plan, is not the same as being prepared. Justin, a parent. Justin and I were having a conversation yesterday about becoming parents. There's no plan for that, right? But there's things that you can do to practice strengthening your relationship with your co-parent to get ready for it, right? It's a great example. Thanks, Justin. There's a great quote that says, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. That's a Mike Tyson quote. And when I think about practice, I think the thing that we want to be asking is, how do we get punched in the face as soon as possible? And the way to get punched in the face, it's kind of hard to punch yourself, is to get yourself a scrimmage partner, a sparring partner who can jump into the ring with you. Yeah, Juliana, an illness. Yep, those are great ones. And often I think one of the challenges with planning is planning can lead to complacency. It's practice that really leads to competence. And so in the past, the main way that we've been doing this is tabletop activities. Tabletop's not just what you need an exercise or a yoga mat for. In 2018, we brought together a bunch of city census leads because we wanted to get them ready for things that were going to be happening in the census. So we had to pull everyone together. We had some amazing support from the data and society folks. They're real experts in this space, but required experts in the subject matter, as well as experts in pedagogy and how to actually get adults to learn, in order to pull this together to create these tabletop activities and exercises. So this practice in the past has been really costly, and as a result, we don't do it. It takes a lot to set these activities up. And they're often just not realistic enough. Before GenAI, you had to imagine all of those sets of possible paths, and there was always ones that you hadn't actually imagined, and it was really hard to update once you'd gotten started. Yeah, we're totally unprepared. Hey, Betty, nice to see you. Unprepared for some shifting demographics. And those are great. Those are some bigger scale things we might want to practice for. But GenAI has some really unique properties that create a new way forward. So, here's what this sort of looks like in practice. I'm going to show you two models. One is it's just Gemini, of course, at Innovate US, it's always, you can use prompts I've provided, but this is always useful just to think about any tool. So we're tool agnostic here. So we just push in a prompt, as usual. It's helpful to be sort of specific when directing it. So you're going to run a scenario tabletop activity to help us better prepare for a bus crash incident. First, generate one scenario that we can provide to the team. Then we'll have you run through a live activity with them, providing updates as we respond. You'll prompt us one by one in a set of questions that we have to respond to. You can help us respond, but get us to do the work. Throw in some updates to the scenario that respond to the solutions and plans as we go. So just always good prompting advice, being specific, providing some context, giving ourselves a role and giving it a role. So, we're a small city manager's team, including city manager, comms director, chief of staff, and the role that it's going to play, maybe providing examples. So if you're an emergency preparedness professional, you might drop in your EOC plan, or if you already have tabletop exercises, you might give it an example. I've also created a custom GPT, which we've just rolling out today. I'll drop into the link for our practice sessions that you can use to play, that is primed up to create these scenarios and to run you through these scenarios as a practice partner. So this is what it looks like. It'll share, here's the scenario that begins. It's going to look different any time. That's the fun of generative AI. And I just want you all to just take a moment to actually do this, to actually step into this. So read the scenario and type your responses into the chat. And then I'll say go, I'll hit enter. So it's 8:30, it's a Monday morning. Your city's IT team has just informed you that ransomware has locked critical systems. I'm sorry for the folks in the room from Atlanta and Baltimore for whom this is all too real. Attackers are demanding $5 million in Bitcoin to restore access, and only Miami has Bitcoin on hand. Meanwhile, misinformation is already spreading online. Claims their administration ignored warnings about cybersecurity vulnerabilities. You got 1 hour. Here's our first prompt. So let's go for it. I want you to feel that experience. So go ahead, type your initial response into the chat. Cool. And what I hope that you sort of think about in this space is, what was it like when normally we just sort of get to read or look at plans, when you're actually asked to respond live and in that moment? And so one really cool way that we can use GenAI as a practice partner is switching our tools into live mode. So we were imagining that we'd have some federal agents raiding our buses in Montgomery County. And so we were going through the scenario and we realized, all right, Governor Moore is calling. He wants an update because there's crowds gathering. What do you do? Governor Moore is now on the line. We switched into voice mode. AI took on the role of Governor Moore. And the first response, I said, okay, pick up the phone, you're there, that a member of our team had was, oh, wait, I'm not ready. And that was actually a super powerful, real response, because that's often how we feel when we're put into that situation of actually getting onto the practice field. It's a totally different mental shift from just being able to sit and write out a plan. Cool. So just take a moment to reflect on what it felt like to be put on that spot. Right? That's that first punch, and the more it happens, the more ready that you are. And then the fun thing about generative AI is, like, this is a live model. It then gives your next development, and then your next development, and then your next development. And so when we use generative AI as a practice partner, what we're doing is we're allowing to set up those scenarios, going through some rapid iterations of the team responding, the scenario responds, and that's sort of the powerful part about using generative AI, right? Is that these are open, complex models where the team responds, then we respond, the team responds, then we respond. It can then help to identify, to evaluate that response, to provide some feedback on that response. Here are some different alternatives. You might feed it based on, you might feed in your current EOC plan. And it might then say, hey, you forgot about bullet points 7, 8, and 9. You might want to strengthen that up here. Or we suddenly had more disinformation than we were prepared for. Or based on your response, here's how you might want to rearrange your plan. And maybe you can build some like smart, quick sheets. That's using it not as a practice partner, but as more of a complement. And then it can help us prompt reflection. So it can begin to ask those questions to help your team or your group or you, whoever's using that practice partner, to reflect on their experience. And then from there, you set up a whole new scenario that it's then setting up for you and running you through again and again and again. And I think what's really sort of key or critical here is, in the old model of doing tabletop exercises, scenario-based plans, full-on simulations, The best that we really had was we were taking these really complex scenarios and we were just reducing them down to complicated games. But the world we know is complex, right? And so what we were doing is trying to map out all of these scenarios in advance, but you were choosing, like it was instinctive for some of you in the chat to say, oh, just choose option B, choose option D. And like we're really good at those, you know, choose a multiple choice answer exams, but the world isn't a multiple choice answer. And generative AI as a practice partner can get us beyond that. In some ways, the old tabletop exercises to me always sort of felt like those goosebump stories, those choose your own adventure stories. And they were really expensive. The mistakes were costly. The cost of a do-over was costly. And so what we would often do is sort of engage our analysis brain instead of our action brain. And I think with generative AI, we're allowed to create sort of more complex scenarios that are responsive to us. And a way to think about this, and I borrow this from Fred Laloux of Reinventing Organizations, is like our old models were really, really good for engineers for building like a whole Boeing airplane that you could take apart piece by piece and have it constructed and ready. But life is more like a bowl of spaghetti, where when you pull on a single strand, you don't really know what's going to be happening next, right? There's so much complexity in that space. And with generative AI, these tabletop activities are not just more robust, but they're cheaper, they're easier. You can run them multiple times, so mistakes aren't as costly. You can do a series of mini tests that build up to a big simulation instead of one big simulation. Here are some of the things that have emerged. I really appreciate the feedback that people have been using this as a practice partner, this from to space. And I'd love, as you all play with this, to be thinking about this and welcome folks to drop into the chat. But the old models, right, were really, sometimes it was scary because you were jumping into this space versus feeling really accessible, right? You can practice on your own first. They were static, they were sort of pre-built versus being really flexible and responsive. They were really costly, and now with generative AI as a practice partner, they're much cheaper. They're much more inexpensive. It takes much less time to build them and less expertise to build them, but allows expertise, especially from emergency folks, to be leveraged in stronger ways. In the past, you would sort of try to do one well. With generative AI as a practice partner, there's a lot of room for action, play space, room for creativity, and it really encouraged us to sort of step into that rapid prototyping. Adults don't really love to fail, right? That's something we've been trained into. This allows us to step into that failing space. We tend to have like lots more of the old sort of tabletop activities. We'd have lots of meetings about that. And we'd have lots of sort of talking about that. And this allows us to sort of go from talk and consider to decide and do. And that's what helps build our competence and makes us more ready. So just want to like sort of fit this into the frame of how we use generative AI before we jump into some practice. And a lot of ways that we've currently been using generative AI are sort of in a replacement model. So it's going to do things for me. That could be it's writing email responses for me. It's going to generate a full policy brief with limited input. It might even be sort of drafting scenario scripts. It's going to do some replacement and do it for me. And some folks have been thinking about it also is going to help me do stuff. So it could analyze those scenarios for us, right? It could roll out the scenarios and do all the work for us. And sort of help me think through all the things that could happen and present those pros and cons. Lots of us are using it for first drafts or for editing. It can surf in, help us prepare agendas for these types of things. There's some folks, I think Ethan sort of talks about using as a conversation partner to help me think. And I want to propose that using as a practice partner is something that's sort of distinct and different. Because rather than it doing it for me or it helping me to do stuff, this is less about the generative AI and more about the human intelligence, those human muscles that are getting stronger. So it's how do we use this as a tool, not to get things done, but to strengthen our ability to get things done now and in the future. So when we talk about using generative AI as a practice partner, we're talking about it where it's engaging me in an evolving scenario or game, right? It's providing that dynamic feedback back and forth. It's helping to run simulations that are responsive to my actions. Lots of folks now are using it for mock interviews, right? Or if you're preparing for a presentation in front of a board or city council and you want to get grilled, it's going to grill you in advance. Using it as a counterparty in negotiations. These are spaces where you're sort of going back and forth with it. It's not just doing the work for you or helping you do the work, but it's literally helping us to get stronger in doing the work. That's sort of the idea. I think it's worth experiencing it, practicing it, and giving it a try. And I think sort of the big why here is just how important it is to jump into these practices, this habits of action and learning, and jumping into iterative cycles. If we want to have more adaptive and more resilient organizations ready for these emergent futures that are less brittle and more ready to serve people where they are, the question is, how do we say, and we just have an hour in this meeting, how do we get this whole team to run through practice scenarios? As I think some of you found, having one person running the practice session and the rest responding can be really helpful. The more government fails and the more that we can fail faster and learn more, the more that we are in a good space as public servants to step into our agency and step into our power and build better work for those by we serve. If folks want to drop their emails or LinkedIn's into the chat to continue the conversation, or I've just sort of released this live, and so later folks come on, join in. If you want to drop your comments, they will die in this chat, but if you drop them in response to the link I just shared, then that will continue onwards. Awesome. Thanks so much. And I'd really we're still developing this practice partner concept and would love to hear how people are using it, what's working, and how we can continue to make it better to strengthen governments and make sure we're more ready for the futures to come. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Michael, for this impressive workshop and all the participants, and hope to see you soon in our next workshop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah.